Okay, so today we're going to assemble a Homestead bench. And as always, the first thing we want to do is identify our parts. So I've laid out my 4 legs and they've been routed out so they're ready for the rails. This is our log stretcher. That'll be one of the last things we put together. I've got 2 apron pieces that are going to run the length of the bench. And then I'm going to grab 4 side apron pieces. Well, 2 apron pieces and 2 lower rails. So I need to grab 2 rails with pocket cuts because they're going to go under the seat and attach the base to the seat. You can see I've already got the pocket cuts for the long rails that are going to go under the seat. So there's my 4 rails that go under the seat. There's my stretcher that goes near the floor. I've got my 4 legs. Now I need 2 additional rails that are going to be like my lower side rails. This will make more sense in a minute. Okay, so here I've got all my parts. So my first step is going to take my 2 lower side rails and I'm going to countersink 2 holes in the center of my side rails because that's how we're going to screw the stretcher to the rest of the base. So I've got a little pattern here that marks the center. 2 holes in the center of my stretcher. I'm going to take my little pokey thing and I'm going to mark my rails. I'm going to just take a marker and highlight that. My eyesight isn't the best, so make it easier for me to see when I do the drilling. Now we're going to go to the drill press. Okay, our rails are ready. So the next step is we're going to take 2 legs, a left and a right. And the way to identify these is if you look at the mortises, we're going to put these 2 opposing mortises together. So I just match them up. And when I build this, I want my mortises to be face up because I'm working from the inside of the bench, because I'm going to screw into the rail, from the rail into the leg after I glue and clamp this up. So here's a left and a right. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply glue to my mortises. And I'm going to grab my lower rail, which is the rail with the countersunk holes. I'm going to make sure the countersunk holes are facing down, because that's the outside of the bench. Because remember, we're working from the inside because the inside's facing up. Then I'm going to need to take the other rail, is going to be the rail that has the pocket cuts in it, because that's the rail that's going to attach the seat. I got to make sure I flip it the correct direction. Slip it in the mortise. Then I'm going to tap it down with a mallet. You can see my rail is sitting above the top of my leg. I'm going to see if I can tap that down a little. Now I'm going to put clamps on my little side rail. It is a little awkward because we are working with round logs, so it is a little challenging at times to get things clamped up properly. Sometimes you have to position the clamps a different way. I like to work, ideally it's nice to have the clamps underneath the piece I'm working on. That way I have great access to screwing these down, and then also I can tap my rail, my top rail, flush with my legs if I need to. The downside is it may have a tendency to want to roll the legs. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put screws. I'm going to toenail screws from the rail tenon into the leg. You really have to use your judgment here and see how much meat you have to work with. Will depend on the length of the screw that you go with. I'm gonna go with a 1 5/8 because I think my legs are big enough, but I have to watch the angle that I go at. I'm gonna go at a slightly steeper angle. So I don't want the screw popping out of the leg. We do a timber bench with a square leg versus a round, and it is a little easier to clamp. Okay, so that one's assembled. Now we'll do the other side together. So I'm going to glue up my mortises again. The rail with the holes, the countersunk holes, again is the lower rail. Countersunk holes facing down. And then my pocket cut rail, I'm going to make sure my pocket cuts are pointing towards the direction of the seat. We're going to go ahead and use the 1 5/8 screws. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to be real careful about the angle because we want to make sure that we don't pop out the leg, doesn't pop out the leg on the other side. Okay, so we've got our 2 bench sides assembled. Here they are. Now the next step is we're going to go ahead and glue up our mortises for our long rails that go underneath the seat. Again, spread the glue with the glue brush. So now we're going to go ahead and take the rails and we're going to stand the bench up to make sure that the rail is facing the correct direction up. And this part is a little awkward because the bench is almost 5 feet long and we're trying to get parts to just kind of stand together for us here. I'm going to go ahead and put clamps on it to hold it in place. Then I'm going to slowly start to tighten my clamps and bring that rail tenon into the mortises. The challenge with these Homestead benches is because they have long legs, it's hard to get a good clamp on them. They tend to want to roll one way or another. The other thing I want to make sure is that my top rail is flush. I actually went ahead, my rail was a little wide. I went and trimmed it at the table saw. I took 1/8 of an inch off of it. As you can see, there's a fresh cut there. But the goal is so the top of the rail is flush with the top of the leg. Okay, that seems to be good. So I'm going to go ahead and put the screws in now. Once again, the length of my screw is really dictated by how much meat I think I have to work with. I'll rotate between the 1 5/8 and the 1 1/4 screws. I want to use the longest screw I can that's not going to pop through the leg. And when I put my screws in, I don't want to be at the very top. I want to come down at least 3/4 of an inch to reduce the likelihood of the rail or the leg splitting out. The next step is to go ahead and attach this log stretcher. I'm going to use a 2 1/2 inch screw because I can. I've already pre-drilled the holes and I started my screws. I don't want the top of the log to sit above the top of the rail. If anything, if it has to be below it, I'd rather it be below. I'm going to go ahead and put 1 screw in on one side and then I'm going to come to the other side and make sure everything is looking good. And then I'm going to line this rail up. I'm really, on this one, the log stretcher, I'm really eyeballing the center. I'm just making sure my log is not above my rail there. The stretcher is critical. It really firms up the bench base. Okay, so now our stretcher is attached. You can remove the clamps. And we'll go ahead and attach the seat at this time. I'm going to bring the seat over. We're going to flip the base upside down on top of the seat and we'll attach the seat. Okay, here's our seat. Should be really clear as to which is the top of the seat and which is the bottom. And all I'm doing is centering my base from left to right and front to back. If I need to pull a tape measure on it, I can do that. The objective is for the seat to overhang the base completely on all four sides. I think I can get close enough by eye. Because we're dealing with logs, it needs to look good visually. It's hard to make that perfect because the logs vary in size. But if at all possible, I do want my rails running parallel to the edges of my seat. So that's something that would look obviously out of place if I didn't do that. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my seat with 1 1/4 screws. Because we are just 1 1/4 thick, I think a 1 5/8 may be too long. Then just step back, take a look, make sure I like it. We've just got an overhang all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the screws in. So our base is now attached to our seat. One other thing we need to do, we've got these countersunk holes that we need to go ahead and plug. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little glue in them and tap some plugs in. I'm going to go ahead and put my bench on edge so my glue isn't going to want to run out. It's just going to sit there for me. And we'll just tap our little plugs in. And I'll flip it around and do the other side. Or my bottle tip is not very small, or at least it's kind of a mess. It's harder to do a clean job. It's always best to have a clean and a small bottle tip, because we don't want to have to be cleaning up glue after we put our plugs in. It's hard to do so then. So these plugs will have to be stained because everything else, all the other dimensional wood on this project is stained. So we will want to stain these plugs as well. Okay, there we have it. There's our finished Homestead bench.